I am going to read a book from every genre of the Goodreads Choice Awards 2024, and I'm going to do it in 3 videos. I've made a list of all the books that I've read, that I own, that show up on the Goodreads Choice Awards, and I managed to split it into 3 different subcategories. So I'm going to make 3 different videos. The first video, which is this one, is going to be categories I haven't read from with books from my TBR. So there are 5 categories that I haven't read a book from, but that I own a copy of on my physical or digital TBR. Those categories are fantasy, debut novel, YA fantasy, historical, and YA fiction. And so I've gone through and I have found books I already own to read for each of those 5 categories. I have digital copies of 2 of those categories. So for debut, I'm going to read We Used to Live Here. And for YA fiction, I'm going to read Dungeons and Drama. I bought Dungeons and Drama on a whim. I didn't even realise it was YA. So it's nice to see it in the Goodreads Choice Awards because it gives me a reason to read it. We Used to Live Here, I've heard nothing but positive things about. So I'm pretty happy to give that one a go. Fantasy, I had 5 books that I own, but the one I really want to get to is Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which is the sequel to House in the Cerulean Sea. It came out recently-ish, and I've been looking forward to reading it ever since it came out. For historical, I only had the one option. I own James by Percival Everett, and so I'm going to read that. I got it because it was part of the Booker Prize nominees, and I wanted to work my way through them. So I'm happy to pick that one up. It's honestly one of the most hyped about books that I've ever heard of outside of BookTube, like in the real world from people I know. James has been massively hyped for me. And then finally, for YA fantasy, I'm going to read The Crimson Moth, which in America is Heartless Hunter, but in the UK is The Crimson Moth. It's about a witch and a witch hunter. And again, I've just heard relatively positive things about it, this time more from the social media side of the world. So those are the 5 books that I'm going to start with, and I'll tell you more about the other videos at the end of this video. So I've started We Used to Live Here by Marcus Clearware, just shy of 25% in. It's a quick read. Synopsis so far. This couple has moved into this secluded house. They're gonna renovate it or knock it down or do something. When the main character, Eve, is at home alone, this family shows up on her doorstep, and the dad is like, "Oh, I used to live here. Is it alright if I show my family around? Do a quick 10-minute tour of the place?" And Eve, who is a very anxious, very people-pleasing character, agrees to let them in, and shenanigans ensue. I'm fine with it so far. I don't know what kind of horror this is going to be, whether it's going to be people doing horrific things or whether there's a supernatural element. It's not really clear yet. I can relate a lot with Eve. A lot of her anxious thought patterns are similar to my anxious thought patterns, so I appreciate seeing that written down in a book. I'm not super hooked. I'm not like, oh, I can't put this book down, but I am enjoying it. The writing is good in that the descriptions of things really help to set the tone of the book. They really help reinforce the kind of creepy, suspenseful factor of the book. And the characters are kind of weird, and you feel this kind of tension and a little bit of unease at their interactions. And I'm interested to see what happens with that, but I'm not like, gimme. I'm just having a good fun time. I described the book to a friend and they were like, oh my god, that sounds so creepy. And I'm just not feeling it yet. I'm not feeling an intense creep factor yet. I'm hoping that some kind of intense creepy scenes will happen coming up to really hook me in, because it feels like a little bit of a slower build. Update you, but I kind of have nothing to say. I'm approaching 80% of the way through and I still don't really know what's going on. It's kind of building to a climax at this point, it feels like, but I just don't really get it. I think it's relying a lot on building atmosphere and setting up these kind of creepy occurrences, but it kind of feels like someone just Googled creepy stuff and then has put all the results of Google into one book with very little connecting them. It's just like, oh, this creepy thing happened, this creepy thing happened, this creepy thing happened. And it's just this kind of repetitive cycle of a creepy thing happening, a creepy thing happening, another creepy thing happening. I'm just getting to the point where that creepiness might be explained by something tying it all together, but it's still very unclear. There is no resolution as of this moment. So I think right now I would recommend it to people who really like atmosphere, who really get into the vibes of a book, someone who really does well with creepy surroundings and creepy occurrences, rather than someone who is really plot or character focused. But I'll finish it up and then we can chat once I have figured out what on earth is going on. I've just filmed my intro, hence why I'm looking put together for once in my life. I finished We Used to Live Here and I gave it 2.75. I think if you're a vibes girly, then this book could really work for you. I've been watching reviews on YouTube and everyone loves it, and I just feel like I'm missing out on something because honestly I was just a bit bored throughout it. If you like vibes, if you like spooky settings, if you like confusing narratives, I think you'll like it. But for me, it was just a little bit so paced. There wasn't quite enough of an explanation about why some of the spooky things happened, and it wasn't quite wrapped up in the way that I wanted it to be. I don't mind an ambiguous ending. I wanted a little bit more of the creepy things being explained than they were. I have heard that there is a lot of stuff on the internet about this book, that there are Reddit threads about it and all that kind of stuff. So I might do a little delve into that and see if maybe it just went straight over my head and maybe there's some aspects of it that I didn't 100% understand. But my initial reaction to what I read is 2.75. Started the Crimson Moth. I am about 150 pages in. For those who don't know, it's a YA fantasy romance about a witch and a witch hunter. The witch is called Rune, the witch hunter is called Gideon. Rune is a witch pretending not to be. She moves among high society and in secret helps witches escape from persecution. Gideon is a witch hunter, a well-known witch hunter who rounds up witches to have them executed. You get points of view from both of them. The magic system is interesting. The witches cast magic using blood, but it leaves behind magical silver scars if you cut yourself to use the blood for magic, and that's often how witches are found. And so Rune uses her menstrual cycle to cast spells, which is a very weak form of blood, but helps her in specific situations. Rune wants to manipulate Gideon into finding out where a specific witch is being held, and Gideon has suspicions that Rune is the Crimson Moth, who is someone who has been freeing witches, which she is, but Rune thinks she might be that person. So he decides to manipulate her to try and figure out if his suspicions are correct. They've both decided to pretend to romance the other one. Where I'm at, Gideon has laid a trap for the Crimson Moth. I'm about to figure out whether Rune is going to fall for that trap and get discovered, or something else is going to happen. Overall, so far, it's been quite and I don't mean this in a negative way, but it's quite a frivolous story. There's lots of talks of parties and clothing and seduction, and it's all been quite light-hearted. They go to the opera. There is some tragic backstory for both of them and for the people around them. This kind of witch persecution has affected a lot of people's lives, and a lot of people have died because of it. Everyone in the story has some kind of tragic relationship to that, whether it's mistreatment at the hands of the witches or having someone they love be persecuted as a witch. While it has darker moments, it's mainly been focused on this kind of light-hearted, fancier things like the opera and parties and clothing. So I'm interested to see whether this trap will take the story in a kind of new direction, or whether we'll continue with the slightly shallower upper classes who love to gossip and drink and dance, or if we'll start going in a new direction. I think I already said that, but that's where I'm at with the book at the moment. I'm not hating it, I'm not loving it. It does read relatively young, but I wouldn't have a problem recommending this for someone at the age of like 15, 16. That kind of age range seems appropriate for this book so far. There hasn't been anything particularly scandalous or steamy, but we'll see. About 50 pages from the end now. How do I feel about it? It got spicier than I was expecting it to. I thought this was going to be an epically slow burn of a series, or not be spicy because of the YA category that it's in. I think it's probably comparable spicy levels to Throne of Glass from what I remember of that series. Not closed door, but not overly descriptive. The action sequences did like pick up a bit moving forward, and I've switched to the audiobook, which I'm actually really liking the narrator of it. So if you're an audiobook person, I would recommend the audiobook of this. It's pretty predictable in some aspects of it. I'm not like shocked by the kind of twists that have happened. It's still pretty enjoyable. There's some classic miscommunication happening at the moment, which isn't my favourite. Yeah, still enjoying. Not loving, but decent read. I can understand why it has the hype around it that it does. I think if this is your genre, this is a good example of that genre. The enemies to lovers, YA, fantasy romance with magic involved. It's a pretty good example of that collection of themes. So if you're looking for that kind of book, maybe pick it up. I'm hoping that there is something really engaging towards the end of the book. I'm hoping that there's going to be some big reveal, some big twist, or maybe a big cliffhanger right at the end of the book that makes me crave the next book. I really want that kind of invested feeling. I finished the Crimson Moth. It did end on a big kind of twist, cliffhangery moment, and I am actually quite excited to pick up the second one. The ending was pretty good. There is still some miscommunication stuff going on, which isn't my favourite, but there is now kind of a bigger plot that's happening, and I am interested in that. I gave it 3.25. I'm going to say it again. If this is your type of book, I think it's a good example of it. Enemies to lovers, YA fantasy, magic, love triangles, any of those appeal to you, I think this book is a really good example of it. The closest book I've read to this is Powerless. So I think if you crossed Powerless with Pride and Prejudice and took out the trials and added a little bit of spice, then you end up with this book. I think it's a book that a lot of people could really, really like. So if it is your vibe, I would definitely recommend it. I gave it 3.25 because those tropes aren't ones that I'm currently looking for in reading. I think there was a time where it was like my favourite thing in the world and I would have rated it quite highly. But right at this moment, it's not the kind of thing I'm actively seeking out in books. I would really recommend this book. I would really recommend it. If you're the type of person who likes those tropes, really 100% pick it up, because I think it is a really good version of those things. But now we're going to move on to a new book. I'm now about 100 pages into James. For those who don't know what it's about, it is a retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the point of view of Jim. I have never read Huckleberry Finn. I have read the Wikipedia article, but I haven't read the actual book. So sometimes it does feel like I'm missing out on some of the plot when they interact. I don't know whether that's taken from Huckleberry Finn, whether that's new to this book specifically, what's genuinely new and what is a retelling. I don't know. So I think there is a case for reading Huckleberry Finn before reading this if you haven't read this. Jim, also known as James, is a slave who tries to escape and meets up with this boy, Huckleberry Finn, and they kind of go on adventures together. Jim is incredibly clever, but views that as a dangerous thing to show, especially to white people. So he does things like dumbing down his speech. He pretends he can't read, he pretends he can't write. There's all this stuff that he does to keep himself safe in this time of slavery and racism. The book talks very blatantly about racism and slavery and the kinds of things that were expected of slaves and the treatment that they got. I thought it was going to be a little more subtle than it is, but there is nothing wrong with how on the nose it is being. I think it is a very good way of examining slavery, right? Like examining what it meant, some of the truths and lies about what was told at the time and potentially now as well. It doesn't use the most emotive language, I would say. It's not particularly an emotional read. There are some emotional moments, but it doesn't play up the emotional aspect of the book. It feels very much like a straight told story, like this happened, then we went here, then we did this, then that happened. There have been a couple of moments where the emotions have been slightly higher, but it's not a particularly emotive story. I am enjoying it. I'll probably check in with you when I have like 100 pages left. Does that sound like a good deal? Should we shake on that? I have about 100 pages left of James, and my feelings remain mostly the same. It's an interesting look at race, it's an interesting retelling of Huckleberry Finn. I think some of the more ridiculous moments probably happened in Huckleberry Finn, and that's why they've been included in the book. But there is a little bit of a kind of a jarring sensation between the more ridiculous characters, which I assume are ones from Huckleberry Finn, and Jim. Jim is very sensible, very level-headed, very intelligent, and in comparison, some of the people they run into are very foolish, very unintelligent, intensely kind of caricatured versions of people. So there is this slight disconnect between Jim and the characters around him, and maybe that is intentional. Maybe it's supposed to be saying, look how intelligent Jim can be in comparison to these ridiculous people around him who claim to be better than him and who obviously aren't, I might add, who are very obviously terrible people. That kind of jarring nature can take me out of it a little bit. The ridiculousness of the side characters can feel, like I said, like a caricature of a person that makes you realise you're reading, right? Like instead of feeling like you're inside a character's head, you're like, oh right, this is a character, this is someone has written, rather than feeling like a really true experience. But I am enjoying it. It does make me want to read Huckleberry Finn, but I've seen that book and it's longer than I want to commit to. If it was a novella, I'd read it and be like, oh, isn't it so cool? I've read both, but I don't want to read a full-length book. I'm not disliking the book. Not loving it, but I'm definitely not disliking it. And I can see why people talk about it so highly, why it's on a Goodreads list, why it was on the booker list. I can definitely understand the attraction of this book. So I finished James. I cannot deny that it is a good book. Like, it's definitely worth all the accolade that it's got. It's really and adventurous, and I think it's a good take on a classic that I haven't read. It really had kind of this weird absurdist humour, was a good kind of character exploration of Jim and him coming into his own. But I did give it 3.75 because it didn't evoke a huge amount of emotion in me. But I did really enjoy it, and I would definitely recommend it. I have started Dungeons and Drama and I'm nearly 100 pages in. I don't think I read anything about this before I picked it up because it is YA in a way that I don't normally read, in that it is about teenagers in high school. We have a main character who is obsessed with all things musical theatre, and she has to work in her dad's store. He owns a board gaming store or a tabletop store, and there she meets someone from her school and gets to know this guy called Nathan. It's very, if you can call contemporary high school romance enemies, then they are enemies. They don't get on, they're very snippy with each other, and things go badly between them. They enter into a fake dating situation. I am a board gamey, tabletop-y person myself, so when she's kind of snarky about people who play board games or what she expects from people who play board games, it does make her come across as a bit unlikable. But she does come around to the idea of tabletop games pretty quickly, discovers they're maybe not as bad as she thought they were, and Nathan gets to know her a little bit. Still has some snark, but is at least a little bit nicer. That's where I'm at the moment. This is really not the kind of book I read. It's not the kind of book I would have had any interest in if it not for the musical theatre and tabletop gaming interests of the characters. That doesn't mean I'm not liking it. It's just really not a storyline that I'm drawn to. They're both very teenagery. I don't know exactly how old they are because I don't understand the American school system, but they both are very dramatic like teenagers are. They're both quite extreme in the way they respond to things, which I think is a very typical teenage trait. There's a lot going on for them. They are managing their situations the best they can, and that happens to be in a very dramatic manner. So I'm just sitting here and I have a little buddy, and I'm getting through Dungeons and Drama pretty swiftly. This is not a book I thought I would find myself liking. I thought the characters were going to be too young, it was going to be too melodramatic, I thought it was going to be too simple and not engaging, but I'm loving it. It's so cute and wholesome. It's really nice to have characters that are just like really passionate about being themselves and are not hyper worried about expressing their interests to other people. I think that's a really good kind of message for a book to have. The fake dating is very cute. I wish it was dual POV, because you can see Riley developing feelings, but Nathan is apparently just really hard to read, so it's really hard to tell what he's thinking and what he's doing, whether he's coming around to the idea of him and Riley being together or not. He is going out of his way to spend time with her. Nothing's like super clear from his end, so I wish it was dual POV from that perspective. 200 pages in, I think it's like 69%. There isn't that much left. It's very quick read, but I'm having a great time. It would be wild if this ends up being my favourite book of the video. That would go against all my predictions. I have finished the book. I had a great time. I loved all the nerdy stuff, all the musical theatre stuff. I said it before, but it's just really great to see passionate characters, like people who are really invested in what they're doing and really proud of their interests and that kind of thing. The romance, there was some miscommunication, which I know can be frustrating, but I feel like it's a given with fake dating that at some point people are gonna fuck themselves over and not talk about things because people are weird and awkward, especially teenagers. Teenagers are weird and awkward. I enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting to. I really thought it was going to be a book that I couldn't connect with. I think it's a really great book for teenagers. I think that it has good messaging about friendship and supporting each other. I think it has good messaging about being wholly yourself and not worrying about what other people think of you. Would recommend it to teenagers looking for a fun read. It's really light and easy, so if you're looking for something like that and you're a bit older, maybe give it a go. But I really enjoyed it, and I think it was a good start for me for YA contemporary romance. I would consider picking up more in the future if they come highly recommended. So that's a really fun discovery for me. There's now a whole new genre that I can look at getting interested in. So it's a win. It is time for the last book in this video. That is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. This is the only sequel I'm reading this video, so I think I'm going to struggle to tell you about the storyline. What I will tell you is that it involves the 6 children from the first book and Arthur and Linus from the first book and the people surrounding them. But whereas the first book was from Linus's point of view, this book is from Arthur's point of view. I have quite a lot of stuff I want to get done today, so I've actually picked up the audiobook for this. I think it was also on the Goodreads audiobook list, which is interesting. I'm liking the audiobook so far. I'm on chapter 7, which is like 130 pages in. The messaging in the story so far is quite similar to the first one. The characters are very lovable. The narrator does a really good job at bringing out some of the comedic moments of the storyline, which I'm not very good at picking up on when I read books physically. So I'm really enjoying that kind of light-hearted aspect of the book. There is storyline going on of perhaps introducing a new magical child to the home. So I've just met him. There is another storyline about tackling the prejudice against magical people in the wider world. I am enjoying it so far. Like I said, I think the audiobook is a good option if it's the kind of thing you enjoy. The narrator is great. I'm listening to it at 2.5 speed and it's still completely understandable and listenable. There isn't anything that is weird about it when you listen on a faster speed, but I'm having a good time with it. I gave House in the Cerulean Sea 4 stars, or 4.5, like quite a high rating. I love TJ Klune books, but actually House in the Cerulean Sea wasn't my favourite of them. So I'm interested to see if the sequel will do anything new or whether it will be kind of a similar storyline repackaged. I am about 100 pages from the end of Somewhere Beyond the Sea and I have wept. TJ Klune just knows how to pull on heartstrings. TJ Klune knows how to make you feel. He is doing an excellent job at it. All his books, including this one, are just such prime examples of the found family situation. I really like in this book that there's discussions of how to support and protect people without becoming controlling, without assuming you know what's best for them, without trying to take away their ability to become who they are. There's a lot of good conversation about how people identify and what that means to them, and whether identities that have been harmful can be reclaimed by the people they're said about. Ownership of identities and what that looks like, and whether to embrace negative things said about you and to take those things and change their definition so that you can reclaim it as something of your own. And I think those are really good conversations to have, and it's all wrapped up in this really heartwarming, cozy, well-written book. And I think TJ Klune is just a master at that. Fantastic at putting these really big, heavy topics in a way that is digestible and easy to understand, but ultimately incredibly caring. I think you can tell I like this book, huh? I hope you can tell. Anyway, I'll talk to you when I finished it. Book. How do I feel about it? I think this book was less of a man's personal journey and more the beginning of a movement and what that looks like in an oppressive government. There's a great author's note at the end. Something I a little bit struggle with the book is that there's all this positive messaging about individuality and creating a safe environment for yourself and other people, and supporting people no matter their backgrounds or their abilities or their hopes and dreams, and creating a safe and welcoming space for everyone to become who they want to be. It's all really great messaging, but it's a fantasy book, right? So essentially everything gets solved by magic. And it's really great having these metaphors for things that are happening in the real world. But when the solution is completely unachievable for real people, does that make the book less helpful? It doesn't make the book less entertaining or less heartwarming. And there are still a lot of lessons to be learned from the book. But I wonder if anyone comes away with it with this sense of, I'm in the same situation and I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if I'm just making up a problem with the book that doesn't actually exist and people just love the book for what it is. And there is a huge amount to be said for putting characters on a page that come from minorities and having them be beautiful, robust, caring characters, and identity going beyond just their identification. So I think it's really great to have books like this that show well-written characters that people can identify with. I gave it 4.5 stars. I feel like whatever I've just said has made me feel like I have a bigger issue with this book than I do. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with it. I did cry, I did chuckle. I would definitely recommend the audiobook. It's well produced. It's the end of the video. So this was part 1 of reading the Goodreads Choice Awards for this year. In this video, I read 5 books for 5 different categories. For historical fiction, I read James by Percival Everett. I gave this 3.75. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this because I rushed my wrap up of it, and I just want to imprint on you how good this book is from a writing standpoint, from a storytelling standpoint, from a character exploration standpoint, from a retelling of a classic standpoint, from all these different ways you can look at this book. This book is fantastically done. The only reason why my rating is lower is because, I'm not sure how to put this, I didn't feel taken in by the story. The book achieves exactly what it's trying to achieve, but to me that put a little bit of a distance between me and the story. There are absurd moments and funny moments and horrific moments and all these different explorations of what it was like to be a Black person at this time, and those are all incredibly valuable, and I'm so glad to have read this book and to have a little bit more of an understanding of other people's experience. But it's not quite my type of story. There is, in the writing, I believe, a distance put between the reader and Jim, and it's a little bit clinical in its retelling, and that type of storytelling doesn't always work for me. So I'm really grateful that I read this book, and I think it will be one that I recommend a lot, and I think it will be one that sticks with me, but my enjoyment of it wasn't super high, which is why I got 3.75. I also read Somewhere Beyond the Sea by TJ Klune. This was for the fantasy genre. I gave it 4.5 stars. Another book I would definitely recommend to people. I can see why both of these books are on the list. For the debut novel category, I read We Used to Live Here. I gave it 2.75. Because so many other people like it, I can understand why it's on the Goodreads list, but it just wasn't for me. For YA fantasy, I picked up The Crimson Moth, otherwise known as Heartless Hunter. This book is a good example of what it's setting out to be. It is a YA, enemies to lovers, witch hunting, witch book, and it does a really good job at being all those things. I gave it 3.25 stars, and that rating is just a reflection of the fact that I have read enough books that are similar to this that it doesn't have the same emotional impact on me, and I'm not necessarily surprised by things that happen within the book. The final book I picked out was Dungeons and Drama for the YA category. I gave it 4 stars. This might come from me being naive about what YA romance is like, but I had a really good time when I didn't expect to. It was wholesome and sweet and lovely and it had some good messages about being yourself and embracing the things you're interested in and being passionate about those things. And I was really grateful for that in a YA book. So that's all the books I read for this video. 5 categories down. We're gonna do 5 more in the next vlog I upload. Should I give you a little hint? I chose the 2 pink ones. I'm gonna be reading Want, and I hope this finds you well in the next vlog. So if that sounds interesting, stick around and we can talk about them next time. If you want to, like, subscribe, comment, all that kind of good stuff that YouTube likes, and I hope to see you again.